Thank you for a fascinating conversation. It's just fascinating listening to like booting up an entire new ecosystem of mobility. I'd like to imagine if this was CoMotion Global 1905, we would be sitting here talking about what would we do with the automobile and how do we supply the infrastructure first and what fuel mixes should we use for it? And yes, what should be the steering interface? It'd be fascinating to think about, and here we're having it happen in real time. But I did think it was really interesting, the point made there about how that relates to Saudi in particular there, given its geography and given its climate and given the fact that I did not know that 14% of the land area of the country was set aside for oil reserves. So thinking about how to deal with those mobility challenges and connecting the various regions of the country together flows directly into our next session here, which is going to focus, I think, a bit more on some of the macro issues here about mobility's role in sort of unlocking economic growth of cities and regions. And so we're going to have a great session here that's going to really sort of talk about how the combination of policy and governance and being innovative on those fronts, combined with integrated mobility systems, and then combined again with the creative financing, all various themes we've already talked about here at CoMotion Global, but bringing them together to really talk about how do you expand connectivity, unlock opportunities for individuals, and accelerate economic growth. And I can't think of a better person to lead that discussion than Karina Ricks, who held roles at the federal and city level in the United States before her current role as partner at CityFi. So please, Karina, the stage is yours.
So thank you for welcoming us, and thank you to this wonderful panel. We're going to have a great discussion today. This is really about economic development. So we all know that transportation mobility is fundamental to economic mobility, regardless of the country, regardless of the context that you're in. But that said, around the world, communities are grappling with funding constraints, fragmented networks, persistent equity gaps. But at the same time, we're really seeing opportunity from emerging mobility solutions, digital tools, and innovative financing models. And we're going to talk about all those things today. Our speakers will help us explore how forward-leading regulations, integrated mobility systems, and new partnerships can help cities expand access to opportunity, strengthen regional connectivity, and accelerate sustainable growth. We'll discuss what it takes to align incentives across various institutions, levels of government, how we harness technology to improve performance, and build transportation systems that are resilient, inclusive, and future-ready. So I'm excited to dive into this conversation and really hear the insights from our panel. And as I mentioned, we have an excellent panel today, beginning with Her Excellency Maja Vukicevic, the Minister of Transport for Montenegro. She's been the Minister of Transport and previously served 2 terms as a member of the Montenegrin Parliament, and previously was the Vice President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. Leigh-Ann Buchanan is the President and CEO of the Miami-Dade Innovation Authority. This is a unique entity that really bridges the gap between private investors and the public sector to pilot, procure, and scale technology and innovation solutions that address the pressing needs of cities in southern Florida. Michael Granoff is the Managing Director of Maniv Mobility. This is a venture capital fund that's based in Tel Aviv and New York. It invests globally in startup companies at the intersection of transportation and technology, and he impressed me because he's run over 25 marathons, which I've not. And finally, we have Mario Centris, who told me that he's Greek, and that's all that you need to know. I'll tell you more, which is that he's also the aviation practice lead for Europe and the Middle East for the Parsons Corporation. He's currently working on King Solomon Airport here in Riyadh and has been in the region for more than 15 years. So by way of introduction, I'd like each of you to just sort of open up talking about your theory of change. How can investments in transportation infrastructure or services technology really help to enhance the economic growth, reduce disparities, and attract additional investments in your countries or regions? Starting with you, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much. At the very beginning, I want to thank you for the invitation to the CoMotion Global Transport Forum. It is really a pleasure for me to be here in Riyadh and to hear all the inspiring discussions about the development of the transport sector. When it comes to Montenegro, as a Minister of Transport, I want to point out that right now we are going through some changes when it comes to infrastructure. We have a lot of projects going on, a lot of projects that we plan to do in the years to come, because in the previous decades we didn't do so, so now we need to better connect our country, and I think that we are on the right path. Where connectivity is fundamental, not only physical infrastructure, but also digital, logistical, and institutional. When cities and regions are better connected with each other and with external markets, new opportunities open up for economy, tourism, employment, and inclusion. Montenegro has a very complex geographic, landscape, so it's very hard to work there, especially if the projects are connected to the north of the country. So for us, every section of the road, every sector of the railway sector, it's very important to connect country better, to connect cities, to connect regions. So that is why we are doing all of the projects right now in order to better connect country for the development of the economy, because we depend on tourism very much. Thank you.
And Leigh-Ann, how about for you?
I love that you said theory of change, and one of the things that I love to reframe is theory of disruption, because disruption is not always a bad thing. I think we're living in a moment of disruption, and that's where innovation, I think, is the appropriate antidote. So at MDIA, our theory of disruption is that cities don't have an innovation problem. What they have is an integration problem. And where they often experience the most friction and a lot of silos and the most choke points is around procurement, because procurement often is the barrier to allowing for a flywheel or a seamless and continuous way for innovation to become the driver of improving quality of life. And so when you think about what that means more broadly, is that there is an opportunity cost associated with scaling civic tech. When you look at the total addressable market, I think cities spend about $6 trillion around the world globally in terms of procurement spend, which represents roughly 6% of global GDP. In the US, the TAM, or total addressable market, of procurement spend is about $174 billion. Yet, less than 1% of civic tech startups scale. They've got solutions to the very problems that cities have, but we're often missing the vehicle and the right approach within government, that integration layer for those technologies like AI, data analytics, automation to land, not just to land for an ad hoc pilot, but to be scaled within the system. And so what we do at MDIA is we think about, what does integration look like at the city level? In the private sector, vertical integration is owning every single adjacent aspect of the supply chain. And so we're focused on helping cities like Miami-Dade and soon to be more cities in the US build what we call the civic integration layer. That's that institutional scaffolding as a government adjacent organization that is the shared rules, data, contracting templates that allow for technology to move in quicker and be deployed faster. It is thinking about non-RFP based ways to find technologies that solve the discrete problems our departments have. Instead of waiting 18 months, a year to find a solution, get it in and out in less than 6 months. And then kind of not sacrificing the quest for efficiency, not sacrificing effectiveness in the quest for efficiency, because we are experiencing budget constraints. And what that looks like is configuring the innovation value chain in government to have an outcomes-based approach versus just output. And that's what I think I'll frame my comments today around, that kind of thinking.
Yeah, we see that a lot in our work, of where government talks a lot about innovation, talks a lot about scaling innovation, but is not tooled to actually receive and allow to scale innovation that improves the outcomes for the residents. But Michael, tell me what your thoughts are about how is mobility an actual economic development strategy, and what are you doing to invest in it?
So I guess maybe I'm the only panelist not specifically associated with a particular region, but I lived most of my life in New York and for the last 12 years in the Tel Aviv area. And one of the things that sticks out to me in terms of cities and policy is that it really, I think, comes down to leadership. For example, when Michael Bloomberg was mayor of New York City, he announced a plan to close Times Square to cars. And people had a heart attack. And they said, that's going to increase congestion by this amount, and it's going to make the city impossible to navigate. And I think they did a poll, and about 80% of New Yorkers opposed. And he said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do it for 3 months. And if it really doesn't work, we'll open the streets back up. And at the end of the 3 months, I think the polls had flipped. 80% of the public supported it. And I think there's a lot of, most politicians, I would say, would be afraid to do something that was 80% opposed. And they wouldn't look at the potential benefits and what could come out of it. And I think that can be applied in lots of areas, whether we're talking about autonomy or talking about congestion pricing, which one of my favorite things to speak about as well, maybe we'll get to later, and electrification and other things that where technology come in a benefit that cities, but the technology is only useful as far as the policy permits it to be so. So I think leadership is the bottom line.
Yeah, leadership, but change is hard, right? People don't, they want to resist change if they can, but here we are in Riyadh, which if you look around is nothing but change. So Marius, what is happening here for economic development and mobility?
Well, I think in terms of, first of all, thank you for having me here. It's a real pleasure. I've done some marathons as well. Maybe not 25. So I think in Riyadh we're living a revolution. Things are changing rapidly. We have, generally in Saudi Arabia, we have cities like Neom, which are vertical cities. This is like a revolution never thought before. It has an impact on mobility because you need to have movement on a vertical way, not only on horizontal. And this will change, the technology will follow. You have eVTOL technology that will follow. This is helped by the technology advancement in electricity, in the battery weight, and I think the regulators are supporting that, especially in Riyadh. It's true that compared to Europe, especially in Riyadh, but in the Middle East as well, the rail network is not so developed. And I think that helps the urban air mobility in Riyadh compared to European cities. So what happened, I mean, people tend to forget that, but post-COVID, people start working from home, and they start moving outside the city, and they develop the micromobility, where you had to go from your home to the school or to your gym. And you use the rail to commute from your work to your house, and the other way, and vice versa. But in Riyadh or in the Middle East, because you don't have the rail network, the urban air mobility for me is the only solution that is available to allow that. So if you combine this with a vertical movement, it's a no-brainer that we're living a revolution, especially in countries like in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, there's a saying, change is the only constant. So we're constantly improving on cities, we're constantly introducing new means of mobility, and yet, for most of Europe, for most of the world, we have legacy infrastructure. We have infrastructure that we invested in, that's there, that we need to integrate. We have built forms, city forms, urban forms, that were not made for the kind of mobility that we have today. And so if we're really going to see economic development, holistic, inclusive economic development, we can't just bring out the new without integrating it with the old. So what are some of the strategies that you're thinking about? Maybe we can start again with you, Your Excellency.
I just thought about this idea to ban the traffic from some parts of the cities in Montenegro. It would be a very bold move. Speaking about the bold moves, Montenegro is one of the first, I think maybe the only country in the Western Balkans that signed the Global Memorandum of Understanding on zero-emission medium and heavy-duty vehicles with the aim to reduce emission in line with the goals set in European Green Deal. It was a bold step taken from the Ministry of Transport, but difficulty is to change the mindset of the people, especially when it comes to the Western Balkans region. But we are taking one step at a time. Sustainable and green mobility solutions, including intelligent transport systems and the future development of urban air mobility, can transform city connectivity and improve citizens' quality of life in several key ways. First is reducing congestion and travel times. ITS optimize traffic flows in real time and improve coordination between institutions, operators, and citizens, making the movement of people and goods faster and more efficient. Second is very important for Montenegro, which is improving safety and reliability. Safety is a big problem when it comes to Montenegro. We don't have very good statistics when it comes to the safety of the roads. It's not just about the infrastructure, it's also about the drivers. So right now we are working on the new law about the roads, so the fines will be a little bigger, and that is something that we need to do also with these intelligent transport systems, but also with improved coordination between institutions and operators and citizens, of course, because we do have a problem with safety on the roads. The third is lowering emissions and improving air quality. I just spoke about it. We did sign the memorandum, but it's very hard to change the mindset of the people in Montenegro. But what we are doing is that we are making some new laws and banning some old vehicles. People are complaining, but they are doing it in accordance to the laws. They understand that we need to improve something, because also we are in the negotiations with the European Union. We are expected to be the next member of the European Union until 2028. So those are some steps that we need to do. Our infrastructure is really very old. Right now we are building a new one. It is a slow process because you cannot do it in a month, 2, or even in a year. But we do have a good strategy, a lot of projects going on. So in the future, Montenegro will look completely different when it comes to infrastructure, but also when it comes to green mobility.
I see. So something that struck me is that you were talking about the changes in regulation. So we're talking about investment, we're talking about how we bring money to it, but money is not the only thing. It's also policy that needs to change, and policy as an economic development tool. And Leigh-Ann, I know you've done some thinking about policy and what we can change to really bring about mobility as economic development.
That's a good point. When I think about policy, I ultimately think about policy as a tool that is designed to ensure people are adequately represented in government, or that the people's interests are represented in government. That's a particularly North American framing. And so for MDIA, we are using pilot-based open innovation challenges, not just as a way of demonstrating or de-risking future procurement opportunities, and really demonstrating proof of value of specific technologies, including mobility technologies. But we use these pilots as a way of identifying where there are gaps in the existing structure that should allow for the integration of technology. When we think about integration, that is the glue that makes systems work together. But more often than not, we're unable to see where process prevents policy, where kind of pilots, when we have a obstacle, we see an opportunity to change policy. And let me give you 2 discrete examples of what I'm talking about. At MDIA, we think about cities needing a civic operating system, so shared rules, data standards, contracting templates, and policies that allow for technology to be integrated faster. What we've done in Miami-Dade County is we've been able to reduce the time to pilot by 67% in less than 2 years. So it used to take 18 months for any technology to pilot, even with the existence of a pilot policy, because the process to even getting that document signed and the way of finding the technologies was inefficient. So now we can do it in 6 months or less. From that, we've been able to surface other policy gaps, which are the pilot to procurement pathway was obstructed. In Miami, you can pilot, but the opportunity to convert that pilot into a full contract is often prevented by a policy that limits the mayor's authority to procure to a certain threshold amount, which is way too small for some of these competitive open innovation challenges. So that's one area that we're working on shifting to then make sure that things just don't die on the vine, that when we've got something implemented, we can keep going. I think a third discrete example of policy shifts is to be able to use pilots as a way of testing new implementation related policies. One of the challenges that we have active is a solid waste challenge, and that is using new types of solutions around composting and biochar, but we don't have existing regulations for that. And so open innovation in government, using these public innovation authorities, they become the testing ground for using test beds as the way of understanding whether or not the existing regulatory framework matches the commercially reasonable standards or matches where the innovation is going. And those friction points, both in process, policy, and test beds, are critical interventions that I think will help things move faster in local government.
Moving faster in local government, that is sometimes an oxymoron. Michael, you work across continents, you work across industry. One thing that I'd like is from your perspective as an investor, government fragmentation in a lot of places is a real issue, right? The interests that cities have, the interests that states or provinces have, the interests that a nation has, it doesn't always align. We're focused on different things. Sometimes the regulation that governs them is different and fragmented. So there might be some requirements placed at the local level, which may contradict the policies and the objectives at the national level. How do you get around this when you're investing in companies and you're hoping that they're able to scale in a very fragmented, inconsistent policy environment?
Yeah, well, I actually came into this industry to begin with from a policy portal. I was one of the founders of an organization in Washington, D.C. in 2004 called Securing America's Future Energy, to talk about how basically diversifying energy was not just an environmental imperative, but a national security imperative as well for the U.S. Things have changed radically since then, mostly for the good, and then with challenges associated with it. But today, when I think about policy, and Her Excellency was referring to the issue of safety, and there was actually just last week in New York Times a very interesting op-ed by a physician who said that when they run clinical trials and they get to a certain point and they realize that the proof is so convincing that they have an ethical imperative to get that treatment out immediately. And he was referencing in this regard autonomous cars, and specifically the safety numbers on Waymo, which are pretty staggering, like 85% reduction in injuries. And when you do see things like that, and then you think about what Waymo, other AV providers have gone through over the last 15 years to get licensed to be able to operate in particular regions, then you realize that there really, is an imperative for policymakers and technologists to work together to be able to implement these solutions quickly, because lives actually depend on it. So, AVs are a particularly interesting policy area because going back all the way to the Obama administration, there was an effort to federalize regulation on autonomous cars that did not get done before he left office. The first Trump administration ignored it, as did the Biden administration, and then this year there's been more talk in Washington on that level. But meanwhile, the industry has moved along and I think proven itself quite well. And it might be that there doesn't need to be a federal framework if local policy leaders can learn from each other and learn from the experience in other cities and get these things deployed quickly.
So having consistent policy. And Marius, maybe if you can speak to this a little bit, it's not just policy fragmentation, it's also we are in a digital age, and yet we have digital fragmentation. We have places where these systems are not integrating with one another. They're not literally speaking the same digital language. And I can't think of a place where this is more important than in the aviation industry. And if you can speak a little bit of what is the importance of having digital interoperability, digital standardization, so that we can really, again, leverage the many different innovations that are coming out?
So, I mean, traditionally, the airports are heavily relying on technology. They don't look like it because people think that they're very expensive in terms of infrastructure costs, like civil and the MEP and so on. But they rely heavily on the technology, and the word that Leigh-Ann used is integration. I think that's a key word in airports. So when you have, for example, in Dubai, where people might remember that in April 24 there were some floods, this has an impact on 2,000 flights cancelled from Emirates. And the reason is because they couldn't catch the delays in the arriving airport. So they have a system called the Collaboration Decision System that allows the airport to talk to each other, so you can cascade the delay to the arriving airport. I think what we're living now is that there is a bit of discrepancy talking about policies. For me, I think there is a discrepancy between the speed that the technology evolves and the speed that the regulators follow. And that's the biggest issue we have. If you look at the unmanned vehicle, I mean, I look at my son, he would trust getting into an unmanned vehicle and fly from one point to the other. I wouldn't, but I wouldn't yet. But I mean, the technology is there. You have autonomous vehicle. They have proven that they're 100% safe, maybe 99.9% safe. Equally, the autonomous air vehicles are equally safe. So once we pass this boundary, the cultural boundary of trust, that we can go in and be driven by an autonomous vehicle, I think the regulator will follow that. For the moment, I think the regulation is still a bit reticent compared to the evolution of technology. Technology is there. They can allow unmanned vehicle in vertical city, eVTOL, we have that. The regulators don't trust the system yet, and I believe for a reason that is, I mean, I don't want to say I come from an aviation world, but I believe the urban air mobility should be given to the Ministry of Ground Transport, not the civil aviation. That would resolve everything.
That's interesting. So I can't imagine, most of the technologies probably that are showcased here, they're 2025 technologies or 2030 technologies, probably governed by 1985 regulations, right? Government is not good. Leigh-Ann, you were going to say something.
I really want to emphasize this point about the delta between the exponential rate of R&D in the private sector and where we often see local government. And I think sometimes we don't actually look at the practicalities. Local government is busy. They're trying to do a million things with limited time and limited resources, so they rarely have maybe the skills, infrastructure, or even risk tolerance to be at the same level, yet we place this unfair expectation that they should be able to compete. And I think what we need to start reframing is that some of these new technologies, some of these organizations like an MDIA can help become capacity multipliers for local government. Because every technology partnership with a vendor, when done right, when executed well, when facilitated, the pilot is facilitated really well, really helps unlock additional capacity. It's just sometimes we don't approach it from a space of empathy and understanding.
Yeah, that's great. And you know, if I feel like we just get going with the conversation and time is already racing away, so we have to end this conversation with the money. We're talking about economic development, the money, the bottom line is there's never enough of it. So we need to really deploy it in the most effective way possible. We need to build those partnerships between the public sector and the private sector. So maybe just as a speed round, what is the best strategy, a tactical strategy that our partners here at the conference can take away of how you can really attract that investment and extend that investment in the best way possible for economic development for your community? Minister?
I want just to touch this topic about the cities and the government, because in Montenegro we have a shared responsibility. They have their own, but state has, of course, its own responsibility, but we are working together because, like I said at the beginning, we are a country that depends much on tourism. That is why, on example, Ministry of Transport is working closely with the Ministry of Tourism, of course, but also with cities and national touristic organization in order to create a plan for Montenegro to attract more people to visit the country. So I think that we are doing a good job. And when it comes to the project and to the financing of the project of the local municipalities, it is also a shared responsibility. Most of that is financed by the state. Some of the projects are financed from the local municipalities, but most of them, when it comes to the transport sector, is financed by the state. When it comes to the projects in Montenegro, we rely very much on our partners from European Union. We are working a lot with European Investment Bank, with EBRD, because we are a small economy, small country. Like I said, very dependent on tourism. That is why in the transport sector we had some challenges previously, especially when it comes to aviation. That is why during this year we signed many agreements, one of them with Saudi Arabia when it comes to the aviation. So in the next year, Montenegro will be much better connected. It will also have some impact on our financing when it comes to aviation, when it comes to people visiting the country, when it comes to the tourism, which we are very dependent on. So when it comes to financing the projects, you need to have good projects. You need to advocate for them. Yeah. That is why from time to time we do organize some presentations of all of our projects, because we have many of them, and we are doing that mainly with our partners from EU, because like I said, we are in the negotiation process, but also we are presenting them all over the world. And I can say that there are a lot of investors that are very interested to come to Montenegro and to work there, which is a success for us.
That sounds great. So transnational investment, international investment, layered investment with the localities in the states. Leigh-Ann, quickly.
Really briefly, 2 words: leverage and measure. Measure the efficacy of the technology that you're using to drive outcomes. So thinking about time saved, people saved, money saved, and revenue generation opportunities as a way of really demonstrating the ROI on innovation. And then leverage is thinking about partnerships. What MDIA has done in Miami is we've attracted 525 startups from 55 countries across the first 6 challenges that we've launched in less than 3 years, which collectively represents $7 billion in revenue, $4 billion in funds raised, and a real opportunity to more efficiently deliver value to residents.
That's great. So leverage and measure.
The single biggest failure in the market economy is the fact that most places give away very, very valuable real estate for free, which is road space. The most valuable place in New York City is the corner of 59th and 5th on a Tuesday afternoon. It's free. You can drive your SUV around all you want. Until this year, when finally, after 30 years of trying, they finally did implement a congestion pricing in New York City, again, kind of as a pilot and with a lot of leadership that took a lot of years. And it is, I think, a huge success. It's going to generate about $1 billion this year for New York Transit. It has reduced traffic and emissions and increased safety. And I think that there are actually, it was done in kind of a crude way, but I think with digital technologies and with some imagination, there are ways to properly assess the value of road space in variable times that I hope cities and policymakers will use to generate revenue for new technologies and for more throughput in the whole system.
I think that's great. So user fees, innovative financing, using the public right-of-way itself as an asset and the valuable asset that it is. Marios, you get the last word.
Okay, thank you very much. No, I just want to say one thing that, so what happened when the electric vehicle came is that you started using, instead of going to a fuel station, you went to a mall, which has a charging thing, so it was commoditized. And I think the same will happen with the airports, not at that size, but if you own a building, you can equally have the roof of the building being an air stop for a eVTOL. So it will be commoditized. So what I mean is that the investment size for an airport, for me, will be downsized to a very small fraction of what it is now. And the second is that in terms of PPP, because my company is involved in many PPPs in terms of technical assessment and so forth. I think the airports are a very good investment, and they attract private equity combined with the technology and innovation. The issue is still very low. I think out of 4,200 airports, we're still at 600 that have one form or the other of PPP. In the Middle East, it's almost 2%, so there is still ground for improvement.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think the answer is all of the above, right? We need to pursue all of this, and I think the return on investment to both the private sector and the public sector is vast. We really can only help grow if we bring in inclusion, if we bring in resiliency, and if we bring in continued mobility improvement. So if you would, please thank my amazing panel. I wish this conversation could have gone much longer, but you can find them in the hallway. Thank you.